Elias Vance, a 45-year-old black man in an immaculate suit, stands frozen beside his flipped sedan. The silver metal groans, a twisted, mangled wreck against the dark canvas of the West Texas desert. His hands are high in the air, held in a gesture of surrender that feels like a bitter betrayal to every instinct he has. Two white cops are screaming at him, their pistols aimed directly at his head, the piercing beams of their flashlights searing his eyes and turning the world into a blinding, disorienting glare. Blood, warm and sticky, runs in a slow trickle from his temple, where a police baton had already split the skin just moments before. But it's their words, each one dripping with a familiar, acidic venom that cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. He's been in firefights with cartel enforcers and stood down hardened mob killers, but nothing has ever felt this raw, this personal. This is not about law. This is about power. Yet, through the pain and the ringing in his ears, he finds his voice. It isn't a shout, but a low, steady rumble of thunder that seems to vibrate with the weight of his exhaustion and his fury. He cuts through their yells, his words hanging in the tense, dusty air. You're digging your own graves. The older of the two cops, Deputy Hank Miller, spits a wad of tobacco onto the dry ground, the sound a small, ugly punctuation mark in the night. A cruel, self-satisfied smirk twists his lips. Shut your mouth, boy. The click of Miller cocking his pistol is unnaturally loud, a sharp, metallic sound that echoes in the vast, empty desert. The other officer, a younger man named Dale Pritchard, seems to waver for a split second, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But it's not enough. It's never enough. Seeing that hesitation, Elias just smirks, a flicker of cold, defiant fire igniting in his hazel eyes. He's been pushed, beaten, and hunted, but he is not broken. You have no idea who I am. And then, far in the distance, a new sound begins to intrude upon the standoff. A low, rhythmic thrum that steadily grows louder, evolving into the unmistakable, powerful roar of helicopter blades slicing through the night air. Is it salvation arriving from the sky? Or is it the final, brutal act of a tragedy set in motion hours ago? 12 hours ago, he was just Elias Vance, a husband and a father, a man driving home after a long, hard job. But this night, this single, horrific night, will reshape his future and the future of his city forever. What ignited this firestorm of violence, corruption, and betrayal? Before we dive deep into the heart of this storm, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law, hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping stories of justice that need to be told. 12 hours before the chaos, before the blood and the twisted metal, the sky over West Texas was a masterpiece of bruised purple and soft lavender. The sun had bled out below the horizon a good 20 minutes ago, leaving behind a faint, dying smear of orange across the jagged silhouettes of distant mesas. This was the magic hour, the brief, beautiful moment when the brutal heat of the day finally began to surrender to the coming cool of the night. Assistant Director Elias Vance of the FBI's Dallas field office was slicing through the sun-baked landscape on his way home, a man who had more than earned a moment of peace. He was driving his silver sedan along a lonely stretch of Highway 20, 40 miles west of Odessa, a city that felt like a world away. The road was a lonely ribbon of asphalt, a dark stripe cutting through an endless expanse of scraggly mesquite bushes and prickly pear cacti that clawed at the dusty earth like desperate, thorny hands. It was the kind of landscape that feels ancient and forgotten by everything but the vultures, which he'd seen circling high above on thermal currents still warm from a day that had peaked at a blistering 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Eli adjusted the air conditioning, a quiet hum filling the car as cool, blessed relief blasted against his skin. He felt the tension in his shoulders, a knot that had been tightening for 3 straight months, finally begin to loosen. On the stereo, a jazz station out of Houston was playing some old Coltrane number, the saxophone's mournful wail crackling softly through the speakers. It was a soothing counterpoint to the low, steady growl of the sedan's engine as he kept it locked in at a perfect 65 miles per hour right on the legal speed limit. Elias Vance doesn't take chances. Not with his life and certainly not with the law. He'd learned long ago that the world was always watching, waiting for a man like him to make one small slip-up. At 45, he carried himself with an authority that was earned, not given. He was 6'2", broad across the shoulders from years of discipline, with a jawline that looked like it was carved from years of sheer grit and a voice that could command a room into silence without ever needing to be raised. Tonight, though, he wasn't the assistant director. He was just a man craving the familiar quiet of his Dallas home. He was bone-tired from dismantling a sophisticated smuggling ring that stretched from Juarez, Mexico, all the way to the Gulf Coast. It was a complex, draining case that had left him with more gray hairs than he'd care to count and a weariness that had settled deep in his bones. He was picturing it already, the fantasy of normalcy that had kept him going through 16-hour days and sleepless nights, his first weekend off in half a year. He could practically smell the charcoal as he imagined firing up the grill on his back porch, the satisfying sizzle as he seared a thick, 2-inch ribeye to a perfect medium rare. He'd crack open a cold Shiner Bock, the condensation trickling down his hand, and just listen to the crickets sing their nightly chorus as the stars popped out one by one over the tall pines in his yard. He'd listen to his 14-year-old son, Leo, talk his ear off about some new video game, and he'd watch his wife, Isabel, finally relax, knowing he was home and safe. He'd earned it, damn it. After 22 years of relentless dedication to the Bureau, he had climbed the ladder from a fresh-faced rookie agent to the assistant director of the entire Dallas branch. He was a black man who had stared down sociopathic cartel bosses, outsmarted corrupt politicians, and faced down threats that would make most people's blood run cold. And he had come out on top every single time. His hands rested at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, as steady as stone. His turn signals clicked with military precision every time he had switched lanes on this long drive from a field office meeting in Odessa. He knew the drill. He knew how to keep everything clean by the book because he had learned the hard way, ever since he got his first driver's license at 16 years old in Atlanta, that out here in the vast, empty stretches of America, a mile doesn't pass without someone assuming he's trouble just for the crime of breathing while black. The sedan's odometer ticked past 212,000 miles, a testament to how many roads just like this one he had traveled, how many nights he had spent chasing justice instead of sleep. Tonight, though, it was supposed to be different. It was just him and the open highway. The last vehicle he'd seen was a rusted Ford pickup hauling hay bales, its taillights long since swallowed by the encroaching dusk. He was alone out here, or so he thought. That's when a sudden, jarring flash of red and blue light stabbed through his rearview mirror. It was sharp and, most unnervingly, completely silent. There was no siren to announce its presence, just that pulsing, rhythmic glow that hit him like a physical punch to the gut. His stomach dropped, because he knew, with a certainty that was both immediate and profound, that this wasn't about a busted taillight or a missed speed limit sign. Not when he'd been clocking 65 on the nose since he hit this stretch of highway an hour ago. He squinted against the glare, his hazel eyes narrowing as he did a final, pointless check of the dashboard. Speedometer steady, gas tank 3/4 full. Nothing was out of place. He muttered the words under his breath, a bitter, involuntary reflex. Not again. It was a tired, bitter echo of the half-dozen other baseless stops he had endured in the last year alone. All of them had started with that exact same look in the mirror, that same cold, sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach that told him no badge, no fancy title, no 22 years of distinguished service could shield him from what was about to happen. He eased the sedan onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching over brittle stones and kicking up a faint cloud of dust that swirled like ghosts in the headlight's beam. He cut the engine. The smooth jazz faded into a crackle of static, and the immense, profound silence of the desert pressed in, thick and heavy. The temperature was still hovering around 90 degrees, even with the sun long gone. Eli reached up and adjusted his tie, a crisp navy number against his white dress shirt. It was an unconscious habit, a small act of defiance drilled into him from decades of facing down scrutiny with unshakable dignity. His fingers brushed against the cool metal of the FBI badge tucked securely in his jacket pocket. It was a cold, hard reassurance, the only armor he truly had against the assumptions that followed him like a shadow. The rearview mirror caught a figure stepping out of the cruiser behind him. A tall silhouette, framed against the last gasp of the sunset. Deputy Hank Miller came into view, his own badge glinting like a taunt under the wide brim of a sweat-stained Stetson. And hey, when you subscribe, go on and ring that little bell too. That way, you'll be the first one called to supper when we put out a new video. You won't want to miss it. Deputy Hank Miller was the living embodiment of a small-town cliché, but there was nothing funny about him. He was maybe 50, lean and wiry, with a sunburned, leathery neck that peeked out above the collar of his Navy uniform. His lips were curled into a permanent sneer that didn't even try to hide the raw, simmering contempt brewing behind his pale blue eyes. There was a swagger in his step as he approached the sedan, a slow, deliberate gait that screamed small-town tyrant. He was the kind of man who had probably never left Ector County and figured that made him got out here, a place where the law often bent to the whims of the man holding the badge. He didn't bother with a polite tap on the window or a professional flashlight sweep, the basic procedures demanded by protocol. He just planted his worn-out boots 2 feet from Eli's door, his presence a heavy, menacing weight. He barked the words without even glancing inside, as if Eli was already a suspect, already guilty of something just for daring to exist on this road at dusk. License and registration, boy. The voice was a gravelly, unpleasant drawl, and it landed like a slap. The word boy was dripping with so much venom it felt like a physical thing, a poison dart aimed right at Eli's dignity. But Eli had been here before. He had faced down men with far more power and far less to lose. He kept his tone perfectly even, a testament to the years of training that had taught him to lock his anger behind an impenetrable wall of calm. "Can you tell me why you pulled me over, deputy?" It was a fair question. It was his right. A right the law said he was entitled to have answered. But Hank Miller didn't deal in rights. He dealt in intimidation. He leaned closer, his shadow spilling across the open window, his breath sour with the lingering stench of chewing tobacco. The sneer on his face deepened. "You people always think you're above the law, don't you?" And before Eli could even begin to process the insult, before he could formulate a response, Miller slammed his clenched fist down on the sedan's hood. The impact was shockingly violent. The metal buckled with a sharp, resounding clang that echoed like a gunshot across the empty, silent highway. A dent the size of a large grapefruit bloomed instantly under his knuckles, a jagged, ugly scar on the otherwise pristine car. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a statement, a mark that was as much about claiming ownership of Eli in that moment as it was about ruining his vehicle. Eli's jaw clenched so tight he could feel a dull ache begin to spread. His fingers curled around the steering wheel until his knuckles turned bone white. But he didn't flinch. He didn't give the deputy the reaction he was so clearly baiting him for. Not yet. He had seen this script play out 100 times before, in 100 different towns, written in the blood and bruises of men who looked just like him, long before he was ever born. He knew, with chilling certainty, that Deputy Miller was not here for traffic violations. Not with that word still hanging in the thick, hot air like a lit fuse. Not with that sneer that promised something far uglier than a fine. The sky darkened another shade, and the first few stars began to pierce the velvet blackness above. Eli felt it in his bones. This wasn't just another stop to endure and shrug off later. This was different. This was the spark that was about to set his whole damn world on fire. He made a decision. He would comply, but he would not be silent. He reached slowly for his wallet, keeping his movements methodical and his hands completely visible. He had learned the hard way that one twitch, one misunderstood gesture, could be all the excuse a cop like this needed to turn a traffic stop into a funeral. He pulled out his driver's license, the official seal of the state of Texas stark against the black leather, and slid it toward the open window. But he didn't stop there. He let his voice cut through the tense silence, as steady and unyielding as steel. "I am a federal officer, FBI. My credentials are in the glove box." It wasn't a plea for mercy. It wasn't a boast meant to intimidate. It was a simple, cold, clear fact. The kind of fact that had defused situations exactly like this one before, usually followed by stammered apologies and quick, embarrassed retreats. But Hank Miller didn't flinch. He didn't even glance at the offered license. He snatched it from Eli's fingers with a flick of his wrist and then, with a contemptuous gesture, tossed it into the dirt outside. The plastic card skittered across the gravel shoulder with a faint, scraping sound that was drowned out by Miller's barking, derisive laugh. FBI? Sure, and I'm the damn governor. Nice try, boy. The word landed again, sharp as a blade, and Eli felt it slice into him. But he kept his face a mask, years of hard-won discipline holding the raging inferno of his anger at bay. Miller leaned in even closer, his sunburned face now just inches from the window, his tobacco-stained breath fouling the air. He yanked the driver's door open with a violent creak of protesting metal. Out! Now! His pale blue eyes glinting with something feral, something that said this was no longer about papers or authority. This was about power. It was about putting Eli in his place, a place Miller had already decided for him. Part 3. The counter-move and the lie. Elias Vance did not argue. Not yet. He stepped out of the car, his movements slow and deliberate, his hands raised just enough to show he was not a threat. His 6'2" frame unfolded from the low-slung sedan with a quiet dignity that only seemed to stoke the embers of Hank Miller's rage. His expensive dress shoes crunched on the loose gravel, and the hot desert wind tugged at his navy tie. He stood there, towering over Miller's wiry build, a stark contrast of composure against chaos. But the deputy didn't back off an inch. He stepped up, puffed out his chest, and shoved Eli hard against the side of the car. The sedan rocked slightly on its suspension as Eli's back slammed into the doorframe. Miller's face was inches from his, snarling, his voice low and venomous. You don't belong on my road. Never did. The words dripped with a racist hiss that wasn't even subtle anymore. Eli felt a jolt of sharp pain shoot up his spine, but he didn't blink. He refused to give Miller the satisfaction of the reaction he was so desperately fishing for. He had faced worse, survived worse, and he was not about to break for this small-time bully with a badge. Before he could even formulate a response, a second pair of headlights flared in the distance. A second cruiser rolled up fast, kicking up a cloud of dust that stung Eli's eyes as it screeched to a stop 10 feet away. Officer Dale Pritchard climbed out, a stocky man in his 30s with a severe buzz cut and a smirk that was a perfect mirror of Miller's. A nightstick swung lazily from his hip as he sauntered over, chuckling. What's this one, Hank? Miller didn't miss a beat. He spun a lie as easily as he breathed. Resisting. Thinks he's some big-shot federal. Pritchard nodded as if this was the punchline to a joke he'd heard 100 times before. He stepped closer, deliberately blocking Eli's path back to the driver's seat, becoming a solid wall of complicity. Eli opened his mouth to protest, his voice calm but firm. I've complied with but Miller cut him off. He grabbed Eli's wrist, twisting it painfully behind his back, and slammed a pair of cold, heavy cuffs on so tight that the steel bit deep into his skin, drawing a thin trickle of blood that stained his crisp white cuff a bright, shocking red. Pritchard let out a harsh, barking laugh as Miller tightened the grip, leaning in close to whisper in Eli's ear, his breath hot and foul. This is just the start. You're going to wish you'd stayed off my turf. The cuffs clicked shut, the sound sharp and final against the vast desert quiet. Eli felt the weight of it, not just the cold metal, but the crushing weight of the hate of a system that allowed men like Hank Miller to wield it unchecked. His jaw tightened, but his mind was already racing, shifting from defense to offense. He was hunched in the back of Miller's cruiser now, the vinyl seat sticky and suffocating. But he was not defeated. His right hand, tucked carefully beneath his thigh, brushed against the concealed earpiece, a small, discreet piece of technology that was a relic from his undercover days. He shifted his weight, a slow, subtle movement, until his fingers nudged the tiny black bud into place behind his ear. The cruiser's rumble masked the faint click as it activated. Miller was too busy spitting tobacco into a styrofoam cup to notice, and Pritchard was mindlessly scrolling on his phone. Eli pressed his thumb against the earpiece, his whisper so low it was barely a breath. Assistant Director Rostova, it's Vance. Highway 20, Odessa outskirts. Detained illegally by 2 officers, Miller and Pritchard. I need backup. Now. The line crackled for a second, and then Eva Rostova's voice cut through, sharp and urgent.
Coordinates locked. Eli.
Chopper's 20 minutes out.
Hang tai.
A flicker of relief cut through the adrenaline. 20 minutes was an eternity, but it was also a lifeline. The cruiser lurched as Miller took a sharp turn onto a dark, unmarked dirt road. 10 minutes passed, then 15. And just as Miller started bragging to Pritchard about how he was going to teach this uppity Fed who was boss, a low thrum began to build in the distance. It grew steadily into the unmistakable, earth-shaking roar of rotor blades slicing through the night sky. An FBI helicopter swooped low, its powerful spotlight pinning the cruiser in a blinding white circle. Miller slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding in the loose dirt. What the hell? A booming voice erupted from the helicopter's loudspeaker. FBI, release the detainee immediately. Officers Miller and Pritchard, you are under federal observation. Miller's bravado instantly evaporated. His sunburned face paled as he scrambled to uncuff Eli, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the lock. Misunderstanding, sir. Just a mix-up, he stammered. The cuffs snapped off, clattering to the floorboard. Eli stepped out, brushing gravel from his suit, his eyes burning with a quiet, cold triumph. He climbed back into his own dented sedan and drove off toward Dallas, the chopper shadowing him like a guardian angel. For a moment, he thought he had won. He thought the nightmare was over. He was wrong. It was just beginning. Back at the cruiser, a furious Hank Miller was on the radio, his voice a low, venomous hiss. Get this to the precinct now. Edit the dashcam. Make it look like he swung first. And within an hour, as Eli crossed the county line, a grainy 30-second video hit the internet. It was a masterpiece of malicious editing, chopped footage showing Eli stepping out of his car, cut to look like he was aggressively lunging at Miller. The audio had been dubbed with a fake, guttural shout. I'll kill you, pig. Miller's shove and the illegal cuffing had vanished from the frame. The caption was pure poison. FBI thug Harris's honest cop. Who's the real criminal? By midnight, it had gone viral. 100,000 views and climbing. The comments section was a digital cesspool of racist bile. Typical. Give them a badge and they think they own us. Send him back where he came from. Cops should have finished the job. Eli pulled into a gas station 50 miles from home and saw the video on his phone. His stomach dropped as he watched the distorted version of himself. A lie so blatant it would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous. He realized Miller wasn't just a thug. He was a player in a much dirtier game. And this smear campaign was hitting harder than any baton, turning his escape into a public trap he couldn't outrun. Because out here, in the court of public opinion, truth doesn't matter when a lie has a louder voice. Elias Vance gripped the steering wheel of his silver sedan, the gas station's flickering neon glow swallowed by the darkness in his rearview mirror as he pulled back onto Highway 20. The engine hummed steadily at 70 miles per hour, but inside, a storm was raging. The dented hood from Hank Miller's fist was a jagged shadow under the dashboard lights, a constant, physical reminder of the night's venom. His white shirt was still stained with a small smear of blood from the cuffs that had bit into his wrists hours ago. A dull, pulsing ache throbbed in his jaw where he'd been shoved against the car. But it was nothing compared to the searing burn of the lie that was now spreading across the internet like a wildfire. The 30 seconds of doctored footage looped in his mind. The fake shout of, I'll kill you, pig, dubbed over his own grainy image, turning his lawful defiance into a racist caricature that had already racked up over 100,000 views. The comments were a venomous flood, FBI thug, and worse, words he'd heard his entire life, but never with his own face attached, broadcast for the world to see and judge. His 6'2" frame was slumped slightly, a profound exhaustion tugging at him after months of cartel busts, now compounded by this deeply personal assault. His hazel eyes, a habit honed by 22 years in the FBI, constantly flicked from the road ahead to the mirrors. Even with the comforting presence of the chopper escort now gone, and Miller's cruiser left in the dust, he knew this wasn't over. Not when a man like that could twist the truth into a noose with a simple radio call and a few keystrokes. He was 200 miles from where it all started, the vast canopy of Texas stars a faint, indifferent scatter above the endless black of the plains, when he spotted them. 3 sets of taillights, creeping up fast behind him. They were too close, their movements too synchronized. Their halogen glow bounced off the asphalt like the eyes of predators pacing their prey. Eli adjusted his grip on the wheel, easing his foot off the gas to 60, testing them. The lights didn't waver. They closed the distance. His gut twisted, that old primal instinct flaring to life, the one that had kept him alive through deadly ambushes and stakeouts gone sideways. The lead vehicle, a jacked-up pickup truck with mud-caked tires and a large Confederate flag flapping defiantly from its bed, suddenly surged forward. Its headlights, mounted high on a roll bar, flooded his car, blinding him as it swerved aggressively to his left. 2 more trucks, equally menacing, flanked him, one on the right, one directly behind, boxing him in with terrifying precision. The road ahead narrowed, leading onto a rickety old bridge that spanned a dry, 30-foot-deep riverbed. Its wooden planks rattled and groaned under the sedan's weight. Eli scanned frantically for an escape route, but there was none. The pickups tightened their grip, their powerful engines roaring, and for a split second, he caught a glimpse of shadowed faces through their tinted windows. White men with hard, merciless eyes and even harder grins. One of them was clutching a wooden baseball bat that glinted ominously in the glare. He floored it. The sedan lurched, pushing 80 miles per hour as he tried to break free from the trap. But the lead truck cut him off again, forcing him to slam on the brakes. Then, a brick, heavy and dark, rocketed through his windshield. The glass exploded inward like a grenade, a shower of shrapnel flying through the cabin. A jagged shard sliced his cheek as it embedded itself in the passenger seat. Blood, hot and fast, welled up, streaming down his neck and staining his tie a deep crimson. The impact jarred him, the wheel jerking violently in his hands. A voice, raw and hateful, bellowed from the truck. "Get out, you black bastard." The words hit him harder than the brick. A slap of pure, unadulterated malice that echoed Hank Miller's sneer from hours ago. Eli swerved, the tires screaming in protest as the sedan fishtailed violently. He fought to keep it on the bridge, the sheer drop into darkness looming to his right. He yanked the wheel hard to the left, scraping the rusty guardrail with a horrifying shriek of metal on metal. Sparks flew like fireworks as he narrowly avoided tumbling over the edge. His heart slammed against his ribs, adrenaline flooding every nerve. He was trained for this, he had survived worse, but this was different. This wasn't a professional cartel hit. This was personal. This was a mob, spurred on by that toxic video, by Hank Miller's poison seeping into the cracks of a community already primed to hate him. The trucks pressed closer, one of them ramming his rear bumper, the jolt snapping his head back. He floored it again, pushing 90, the engine whining in protest as he finally broke through their gauntlet. The end of the bridge rushed up in a blur of headlights and dust. He was clear. The tires hit solid asphalt, and the pickups began to lag behind as he hit 100 miles per hour, the speedometer trembling. But then, a sharp crackle cut through the chaos, the sound of a CB radio spitting static from the lead truck, and Hank Miller's voice, raspy but loud and clear, rasped out a command that chilled Eli to the bone. "Finish him for me." This wasn't random vigilantism. This was Miller's next move. This was a hit squad, unleashed to bury him where no FBI chopper could ever swoop in to save him. The trucks peeled off, their taillights fading into the darkness as Eli raced toward Houston, blood dripping onto his lap, shattered glass crunching under his shoes. He was alive, barely. His hands were shaking on the wheel, but his mind was already turning, because he knew Miller wasn't done. He knew that video was just the spark, and this mob was the fire, and it was only going to burn hotter from here. He wiped his cheek, the cut stinging sharply, and muttered a vow to himself to the night. "You're going to regret this, because Elias Vance doesn't run. He fights, and this fight was just getting started." Elias Vance barreled down Highway 20, the silver sedan's engine roaring at 90 miles per hour as gusts of hot desert air whipped through the shattered windshield. He was 40 miles from Dallas now, blood crusting on his cheek from the brick that had nearly taken his head off on that rickety bridge 10 minutes ago. The jagged piece of glass embedded in the passenger seat glinted under the dashboard lights, a grim trophy from the mob's savage attack. His navy tie hung loose, shredded at the end where it had caught on the splintered guardrail during his escape, and his once pristine white shirt was now a horrifying mess of red stains blood from his wrists, his cheek, his pride. His 6'2" frame was tense, his hands gripping the wheel with a force that still trembled from the adrenaline of outrunning those Confederate flag-waving pickups, an attack orchestrated by Hank Miller's venomous command to finish him. The viral videos lies FBI thug Harris's honest cop still burned in his mind, the view count climbing, turning him into a public target for every racist with a grudge within a 100-mile radius of Odessa. That mob was the terrifying proof that Miller wasn't just a rogue cop. He was a puppet master, skillfully pulling strings that Eli couldn't yet see. He was 240 miles from where this nightmare had kicked off with that unlawful stop, the stars overhead blurred by the wind rushing through the broken glass. He spotted the faint glow of a familiar town just 10 miles ahead, a chance to stop, to breathe, to get help from people he thought he could trust. He eased off the gas, dropping to 60, and veered toward a precinct he knew well from joint operations with the local PD. It was a squat brick building just off the interstate, a place where he had collaborated on cartel busts alongside their teams over the past 3 years. The sedan limped into the parking lot, tires crunching over loose gravel, the dented hood rattling as he killed the engine. He was a mess, bloodied and bruised, but he was the damned assistant director of the FBI, and he was not about to let Hank Miller's backwoods goons chase him into hiding like some fugitive from their own doctored footage. He stepped out, wincing as his dress shoes hit the pavement, the night air stinging the fresh cut on his cheek. He adjusted his jacket, torn at the shoulder but still carrying the significant weight of his badge in the inner pocket, a cold, steel lifeline he had clung to for 22 years. The precinct's neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a sickly green glow across the empty lot. Eli strode toward the glass doors, his jaw set, his mind racing with a clear plan. Report the illegal stop, report the mob attack, report the doctored video, and get federal eyes on Hank Miller before this spiraled any further out of control. He pushed inside. The desk sergeant, a wiry white man with a graying mustache, barely looked up from his lukewarm coffee, muttering, "State your business," in a drawl that was more boredom than authority. Eli didn't hesitate. He pulled out his FBI ID, the gold shield glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights, and slammed it down on the counter. His voice was steady, despite the deep ache in his bones. "Elias Vance, FBI Dallas. I was illegally detained by one of your officers, Victor Hensley. Then I was attacked by a mob. He sicked on me. I need to file a full report, and I need to see your watch commander. Now." The sergeant glanced at the badge. Then his eyes traveled up to Eli's face, taking in the bloody shirt, the torn suit. He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "All right, federal, sit tight." He gestured to an interview room down the hall with a dismissive flick of his pen. Eli followed, stepping into a cramped, claustrophobic box with peeling paint and a metal table bolted to the floor. The door clicked shut behind him. He sank into a hard metal chair, the cold steel biting through his jacket, and for a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to hope. He let himself believe that these cops, his supposed colleagues in law enforcement, would see the badge, hear the truth, and back him up, just as the law demanded. 10 minutes later, 2 officers entered. Both were white, both in crisp Navy uniforms. Officer Lyle Grayson was tall and lean, with a prominent scar across his knuckles. Officer Tom Burke was shorter, stockier, with a buzz cut and a smirk that didn't quite reach his cold eyes. They nodded at Eli. "Heard you had a rough night, Mr. Vance," Grayson said, his voice smooth. "We'll look into it." Burke began jotting notes on a clipboard, his pen scratching loudly in the heavy silence. Eli laid it all out for them. Miller stopped, the cuffs, the chopper rescue, the smear video, the bridge ambush. His voice was steady, his facts crisp, expecting action. But as he spoke, Grayson's eyes narrowed, and Burke's smirk widened into a cruel grin. Before Eli could finish, the door locked with a heavy, final thunk. Grayson spun the key with a soft chuckle. "Miller's our brother. You're nothing here." Eli's stomach dropped. His hands flexed against the cold metal of the table as Burke stepped closer and, with a look of pure contempt, spat directly in his face. The wet glob hit his cheek with a sting. "FBI don't mean shit to us," Burke sneered, his voice dripping with menace. "You think you can just roll in here and cry wolf?" The saliva dripped down, mixing with the blood already there. Eli wiped it off, slow and deliberate, his mind screaming with the raw sting of betrayal. These weren't cops. They were Miller's pack, and he had just walked right into their den. Grayson pulled out his phone, dialing with a triumphant grin. "Hank, you'll love this. He's here." An hour later, the door swung open again. Hank Miller strutted in, his sunburned neck redder than ever, his nightstick twirling like a toy in his wiry hands. He didn't hesitate. He didn't speak a word. He just swung the baton hard, cracking it across Eli's jaw with a sickening crunch that snapped his head back. Pain exploded, white-hot and blinding, through his skull as he slumped against the chair. Blood pooled in his mouth, metallic and sharp. Miller leaned in, his breath hot and sour, snarling, "Thought you'd snitch? Thought your fancy badge would save you?" He swung again, the stick slamming into Eli's ribs with a dull thud that stole his breath. He gasped, his vision blurring, but his training kicked in, a survival instinct that kept him conscious, that kept him alive. Because he knew, with terrifying clarity, that this brutal beating was just Hank Miller's warm-up. It was just a taste of the hell he had planned. The room spun, the fluorescent buzz deafening, and Eli clenched his fists, blood dripping onto the table. He was down, but he was not out, and Hank Miller was about to learn that the hard way. Well, folks, that's all she wrote for today. If you feel like it, we'd love for you to stick around. A like or a subscription would be mighty fine. But either way, we're just glad you stopped by for a spell. Elias Vance slumped against the cold metal chair in the Odessa precinct's interview room, the taste of blood thick and coppery in his mouth as it dripped from his split lip onto the scratched table. His jaw throbbed where Hank Miller's baton had cracked it, a white-hot, pulsing pain, and his ribs ached with a deep, blooming bruise beneath his torn, blood-soaked shirt. The fluorescent lights buzzed mercilessly overhead, casting harsh shadows across the peeling beige walls. He was trapped in this concrete box, betrayed and beaten, the precinct's neon sign still flickering outside a mocking beacon of the safety he had foolishly thought he'd find. Miller stood over him, his wiry frame coiled with menace, his sunburned neck flushed red as he twirled the nightstick, smirking. "Thought you'd snitch, huh? Thought you'd run to your Fed buddies?" Officers Grayson and Burke leaned against the locked door, a pair of smug sentinels. Grayson's scarred knuckles flexed, and Burke's smirk widened as he wiped non-existent spit from his chin, reliving the moment of his own petty cruelty. It was a betrayal that stung worse than the physical beating. Eli's 6'2" frame was hunched, his navy tie dangling in tatters, but his hazel eyes, though hazed with pain, were sharp. They burned, tracking every single move. 22 years in the FBI had taught him to stay sharpest when the odds were most stacked against him, and right now they were a tower ready to topple and crush him. His right wrist, still raw from the cuffs hours ago, brushed against the chair's armrest, and he felt it. A tiny, loose pin in the cuff that still dangled from his left hand. It was a sliver of steel, bent just enough to be worked. He had noticed it when Miller had first slammed him down a sloppy mistake from a sloppy, arrogant cop. And now it was his lifeline. Miller paced, ranting about teaching you your place. his boots scuffing the cheap linoleum floor. Grayson chuckled along, and Burke, bored now, was scrolling through his phone, completely distracted. Eli shifted his weight, a slow, deliberate movement, sliding the pin free with his thumb. His fingers, though slick with blood, were steady. He slipped the pin into the cuff's lock, feeling for the mechanism. It gave with a faint, almost imperceptible click, a sound he masked with a harsh, wet cough as blood spattered his chin. Miller didn't notice, too busy swinging his baton in mock arcs. But Eli's mind was racing. 3 against 1. No gun.
No backup.
A locked door. But he had the element of surprise. And right now, that was enough. He waited, biding his time, breathing through the pain, until Miller turned to share a laugh with Grayson. Then Elias Vance moved. He exploded from the chair like a coiled spring, lunging up and slamming his elbow directly into Hank Miller's throat. A guttural choke cut off the cop's sneer as the baton clattered uselessly to the floor. Burke lunged, but Eli was already in motion. He grabbed the heavy metal chair and swung it hard, the frame cracking against Burke's skull with a sickening thud that dropped him, limp and unconscious, to the ground. Grayson was on him next, his fists flying, but Eli ducked under the wild punch, years of defensive tactics training kicking in. He drove his knee hard into Grayson's gut, doubling him over in a gasp of pain. He snatched the keys from Grayson's belt, bolted for the door, and jammed the key into the lock, twisting it open just as Miller, wheezing and clawing for his radio, managed to gasp out, "Stop him! Damn it!" Eli burst into the hall, the precinct a blur of beige and buzzing lights. He sprinted past the desk sergeant, who was too slow and too stunned to react, coffee spilling from his cup as he yelled a useless, "Hey!" He hit the parking lot, the hot night air hitting his lungs like a furnace, and spotted a patrol car idling 20 feet away, keys still in the ignition from some rookie's smoke break. He dove in, slammed the door, and floored it. The cruiser peeled out with a screech of tires, gravel spraying as he tore onto the interstate, his heart hammering against his bruised ribs, blood dripping onto the seat. He was free. He grabbed the car's radio, switching it to a secure FBI channel, his voice hoarse but firm. "Rostova, it's Vance. Precinct's dirty. Miller's crew beat me. I'm out. Heading east. Send a team." Eva Rostova's voice crackled back instantly. "Copy. 60 miles out. Stay low." He exhaled, thinking he was clear. But then the scanner flared to life, a statewide alert blaring through the car. "All units, be advised. FBI Assistant Director Elias Vance wanted for assaulting 3 officers. Suspect is armed and dangerous. Last seen fleeing Odessa precinct in a stolen vehicle." It was followed by a flood of frantic chatter. Suspect attacked 3 cops. Critical condition. Eli's gut twisted into a cold, hard knot. He hadn't killed anyone. Burke was out cold, not dead. But the lie, the frame-up, was already spreading, painting him as a violent fugitive. And then, Hank Miller's voice cut through the scanner, sharp and smug. "He's a dead man now. Find him. Finish him." It was a taunt, a command, a death sentence broadcast to every badge in the state of Texas, turning his desperate escape into a noose he couldn't slip. He ditched the radio, the cruiser's speedometer climbing to 95. He was alive, but he was hunted. And Hank Miller had just turned the entire damn state into his personal executioner. He raced through the night, a fugitive in a stolen car, his own agency now potentially part of the manhunt against him. He knew he was out of options, out of time, but he wasn't out of fight. He met Rostova and a heavily armed tactical team at a desolate, prearranged safe house hidden in the desert scrub. They had warrants, the recordings from his earpiece, and a plan. They weren't just going after Miller anymore. They were taking down the whole rotten precinct. They hit the precinct at dawn. The sky was a bruised purple as FBI choppers descended, their blades whipping up a storm of dust. Agents stormed the building, flashbangs popping, smoke curling through the halls. Eli, bruised but resolute, a Glock now firmly in his hand, kicked in Miller's office door. He caught him mid-rant on the phone. "You're done, Hank." Eli said, his voice cold as ice. They cuffed Miller and his cronies live on the local news, which had been tipped off and was swarming the building. It was a victory. A hard-won, bloody victory. But as Eli stepped outside into the first rays of the morning sun, a sharp crack split the air. A sniper's bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through his vest with a searing burn that dropped him to his knees. As agents scattered, shouting, a small piece of paper fluttered down, landing in the dust beside him. Scrawled in black ink were 3 words, "You're next, traitor." Eli stared at it, the pain in his shoulder forgotten. Miller wasn't the head of the snake. He was just a fong. And the real poison, the real power was still out there, watching him, and had just sent him a message. A dying gunman from the earlier highway ambush, under intense interrogation by Rostova's team, finally gave up the name with his last, gasping breath. Judge Bishop wanted you silenced. Judge Leland Bishop, the 58-year-old, silver-haired patriarch of West Texas justice. A man who shook Eli's hand at charity galas while running a criminal empire of drugs, bribes, and corrupt cops like Miller. Eli, wired for sound, went to meet him alone at his sprawling mansion, a fortress of corruption disguised as a home. The confrontation was tense, a high-stakes poker game. Bishop, arrogant and untouchable in his own mind, laid it all out. "You're a problem, Vance," he said, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. "Too clean, too loud. For 10 years, I've owned this state. Judges, sheriffs, even a few feds. I'll bury you, your wife, and your kid, just like I've buried a dozen others who got in my way." It was a full, damning confession, broadcast live to Rostova's team listening in from miles away. "That's enough," Eli said, standing up. "The FBI has you." Bishop's smile finally faded. He snapped his fingers, and 10 militia members in black fatigues burst into the room, their AR-15s blazing. The opulent study, moments before a stage for arrogant confession, instantly transformed into a killbox. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood as 9 black-clad militia members closed in, their AR-15s spitting fire. Outside the mansion's stucco walls, the West Texas dusk was settling, the temperature a balmy 85 degrees. Inside, it was a furnace, the 70-degree air spiked by raw adrenaline and the deafening crack of bullets shredding priceless marble and antique oak. Eli's fresh white shirt, provided by an agent just hours ago, was already a crimson ruin, his shoulder bleeding freely through the makeshift bandage over the sniper's graze. His ribs, still tender from Miller's baton, ground together with every desperate breath. His 6'2" frame was pressed low behind a splintered bookshelf, his Glock trembling in his hand, one single round left in the magazine. The wire on his collar crackled, Rostova's voice cutting through the chaos. 5 minutes out. Hold on. But 5 minutes was an eternity when assault rifle barrels were gleaming just 3 feet away. Bishop's damning confession, "I've owned this state, buried a dozen like you," was still live on the feed. A jackpot of evidence that Eli couldn't cash in if he was dead. Shards of glass from the shattered crystal chandelier crunched under his dress shoes as he shifted his weight, his hazel eyes darting, processing the tactical nightmare. 9 gunmen, fanned out, 2 flanking left, 3 right, for advancing straight ahead. Their heavy combat boots thumped on the marble floor as Bishop's shouted command, "Kill him!" echoed from the hallway where he had fled. Eli's mind raced, 22 years of FBI training boiling down to this single, desperate moment. He spotted the bourbon bottle on the floor, Bishop's crystal glass cracked but still half full. He grabbed it, and with a flick of his wrist, hurled it hard to his left. It smashed against a far wall, liquor splashing, and just as he'd hoped, 2 gunmen spun, firing instinctively at the sound. It was a split-second distraction, but it was all he needed. He seized the opening, lunging to his right, his last bullet punching through a 3rd gunman's throat. Blood sprayed as the man dropped, his rifle clattering to the floor. Eli snatched it 15 rounds in the mag rolling as a hail of bullets chewed the bookshelf to splinters, the wood stinging his cheek. He opened fire, controlled short bursts, dropping 2 more, their bodies crumpling to the marble with wet, final thuds. 6 left. They pivoted, closing fast, but he was already moving, diving behind a heavy leather sofa. Its expensive stuffing exploded as rounds tore through the hide. He popped up, 3 shots, 3 hits chest, head, chest. 3 more down, 3 standing. Their professional shouts turned to panicked curses as he flanked them, using the room's thick marble pillars for cover. A 4th fell to a clean double tap, his blood pooling under the wreckage of the chandelier. The last 2 charged, one swinging his rifle like a club as Marcus's clicked empty. He ducked, slamming the stock of his own rifle into the man's jaw, bone cracking, then spun, grabbing the knife from the second man's belt mid-lunge and plunging it deep into his gut. A gurgling choke, and the final gunman collapsed. The study fell silent, the only sounds the slow drip of blood and the distant, growing thrum of chopper blades. Eli staggered to his feet, his ribs screaming, his shoulder a firestorm of pain. He grabbed a spare magazine from a dead man's vest, reloaded, and limped after Bishop. He kicked through the side door into a pristine garage where the judge was scrambling for a black Escalade, his keys jangling in his trembling hand. Eli fired a single warning shot, a tire exploding with a loud bang. Bishop froze, his hands shooting up, his silver hair wild. "You're done, Bishop, my men." The judge started, but Eli cut him off, his voice a low growl. "Your men are dead." He dragged the powerful man back into the mansion just as Rostova's chopper landed on the lawn, agents storming the grounds. They snapped cuffs on Bishop's wrists. Live news feeds, tipped off and swarming the gates 40 yards away, caught it all, broadcasting Bishop's stunning fall from grace statewide. His empire of drugs, bribes, and corrupt cops crumbled in real time as Eli stood over him, bloodied but unbroken. The wires tape a sledgehammer that had just shattered the foundations of Odessa's rot. As deputies hauled Bishop, the puppet master, to a waiting convoy, his tailored suit rumpled, his face a mask of shattered rage, Eli leaned heavily on Rostova, his shoulder pulsing with pain. "Get Isabel and Leo out. Now." Rostova nodded, her face grim but relieved. "Charges dropped. They're free. Bishop's crew is folding like a cheap suit." A victory, carved from 12 hours of pure hell that had started with a simple, racist traffic stop. Hank Miller's 10-year sentence was now just a footnote to Clyde Warren's complete collapse. The dust settled, the sirens wailed, and Eli limped toward the convoy, the sun finally dipping below the bluff. He had won. The war was over. Justice had been clawed back from a system that had tried to bury him, his family, and his name. He stared at the papers, his mind blank, as they trembled in his hand. Blood from his fingers stained the seal. She turned without another word, and Leo, after one last, wet-eyed glance back at his father, followed her. Her silhouette shrank against the flashing lights of the convoy, their car's taillights disappearing down the bluff. Eli stood frozen, the heavy Glock slipping from his numb fingers to the sandy ground. The weight of it all, the fight, the pain, the victory crashed down on him. Hank Miller was jailed. Judge Bishop was finished. The cartel's cash lines were severed. But his family was gone. The cost of a fight he didn't start but couldn't stop. The sirens faded, the agents shouted orders, and he was completely alone, victorious but hollow. The desert swallowing the last of the day as he stood in the ruins of one empire and the ashes of his own. Elias Vance's journey through 12 brutal, unrelenting hours, from a racist traffic stop on a lonely Texas highway to toppling a corrupt judicial empire, teaches us a lesson that is as harsh as it is true. Justice isn't a gift. It is a fight. Racism isn't just found in hateful slurs or swinging batons. It's a deep-rooted system, woven into the very fabric of badges, courts, and angry mobs, ready to crush anyone who dares to challenge its power. Eli, a decorated black FBI assistant director, faced that system head-on. Hank Miller's cuffs, the smeared viral video, the mob's flying brick, the planted drugs that turned his own family into pawns. Each blow was worse than the last, and each small victory was nearly undone by an even deeper betrayal. It proves that prejudice doesn't die quietly. It claws back with every tool at its disposal. His resilience, however, shines through it all, picking locks, rallying loyal agents, and masterfully recording a powerful man's confession shows that incredible strength and sharp cunning can defy even the most rigged odds. But the story's final, devastating twist, the divorce papers in his bloodied hand, reveals a brutal, heartbreaking truth. The righteous fight for the greater good can hollow out your personal life, leaving behind scars that no badge, no medal, and no victory can ever truly heal. Corruption, too, isn't just one man. It's a network, a cancer that spreads from Miller's clenched fists to Judge Bishop's millions, thriving on the silence of good people until someone like Elias Vance rips it open into the light. His windjailing Miller exposing Bishop's Park's hope. It shows that one voice, one person, relentlessly loud and unyielding, can indeed crack a rotten foundation. The ultimate lesson is that justice demands a profound sacrifice, but perhaps it's worth it if it wakes up a system that has slept for too long on the backs of the oppressed. So we have to ask you, did Elias Vance pay too high a price for justice? Or was his sacrifice the only way to finally break this vicious cycle? Comment below with your thoughts. Hit that like button if the story fired you up, and make sure you subscribe and share this video to keep these vital, powerful tales alive. Your voice matters. Thanks for sticking with us through this wild ride. We're grateful for every one of you. Stay strong and keep fighting the good fight.